We need to hear from Keith Boag, who's watching this as it unfolded just suddenly starting yesterday afternoon. Keith, good morning in Washington. Good to have you here today.
Thank you.
So I keep making the point, just so people understand clearly, this is the President of the United States who has fired the man leading the investigation into whether his associates colluded with Russia in the last election, and also on the advice, we understand, of the Attorney General, who himself had to recuse himself from that very Russian investigation. That's what we're dealing here with this morning. What is the significance of that?
Well, it's never happened before, Heather, and you framed it exactly right. That is why there is so much concern here. It is because the president has the authority to knock the FBI off this investigation into his campaign if he wants to, and there is a suspicion, at least among Democrats, but certainly there are some Republicans who wonder as well, whether that isn't exactly what the president is trying to do now. He was, after all, hugely supportive of the protocols that the FBI Director Comey followed during the election campaign when it suited him, and he didn't care about the protocols at all when it didn't suit him. So why suddenly is FBI protocol the decision-making point for Donald Trump? It has always been for Donald Trump the content of what Director Comey says, whether it suits Donald Trump or whether it doesn't suit Donald Trump. The protocols, the policies have not been of much interest to him. It's hard to be convinced that they are of interest to him now.
So the question looking forward is what comes next? Will this derail the investigation totally, or is there an opening here now for special counsel, special prosecutor?
Well, you know, first of all, we're going to hear a lot of demands for that the demands coming mainly from Democrats, but Republicans as well, that there should now be an independent prosecutor, a special prosecutor. But look, we're really only in the middle of this. The other thing that has to happen in order to give us a full understanding of what the circumstances are, that has to come when Donald Trump appoints the next director of the FBI. It is possible for him to appoint somebody who has the respect of both sides of the House. That's not out of the question. And if he were to do that, that would go a long way towards reassuring members on both sides of the House and the country, by the way, that he is not trying to interfere in the investigation. It could be that he appoints exactly the kind of person that Democrats fear he's going to appoint, someone who is, as has been described, just a stooge for Donald Trump. If he were to do that, it would be a huge crisis for the United States, because it would appear that the president was abusing his office to avoid further investigation into his conduct during the election or the conduct of his associates. But until we know the answer to that question, who is the next FBI director going to be, it's hard to make a very clear assessment in all of this noise right now.
Yeah, looking at this as a political crisis, not yet sure whether it's developed into a full-blown constitutional crisis, if I can put it in that phraseology. You mentioned Republicans, some of whom have expressed concern. Some say they are troubled by the dismissal and the suddenness of it. Where are they left now, Keith, in terms of how they lead the president to respond, how they respond? We haven't heard from Paul Ryan, for example.
Okay, well, here's what we know about Republicans. Based on the campaign last year, many of them are initially shocked by things that Donald Trump does and says and recoil at them. That seems to be what has happened in the early stages of this story among some Republicans. But what we learned through the election is that they pull behind him. They get over it. It doesn't matter how outrageous what he said the day before was. They think about tomorrow, and they find a way to get behind him. That is, in fact, how he got elected, with the Republican Party pulling behind him. And you have all kinds of people now who have supported him, supported his policies, say he's a great president, who wouldn't have said anything like that a year ago. So that's the pattern of behavior that we have come to see from Republicans. What we hear from them today about their deep concerns and their feelings of being troubled by what Donald Trump has done may not be at all what they say tomorrow or next week.
So interesting. Okay, that's what they may or may not say. I'm wondering, though, what we may hear from the American people. There are voices saying this surely must lead to impeachment proceedings. Will there be calls for that? Will we see any sort of action in the street, Keith, as people perceive this as an assault on democracy?
Okay, so many things to say about that, but your point about hearing from the American people may well be the most important point. In talking about these issues over several weeks, with politically experienced people here. Issues around impeachment, Richard Nixon, Bill Clinton, and so on. What has been driven home to me is that none of these things becomes a crisis, a full-blown constitutional crisis with serious thoughts of impeachment in the air, unless the American people are behind that. So it is critical in the next days and weeks to see how the American public reacts. It would not have been possible to drive Richard Nixon from office if the threat of impeachment hadn't been there and the feeling in the country that he had to go. At the same time, Bill Clinton would not have been rescued from impeachment by the Senate if they did not feel confident that the country would be behind them, that the President Bill Clinton had 60% or more support for continuing in office. So that is critical now for how Democrats approach this next. You know for sure that impeachment is on their minds. When they talk about abuse of office, obstruction of justice, as they are talking about now, impeachment has to be on their minds. But they are smart enough to know that this is not going to go forward unless the country is behind it. And the biggest difference between now and Nixon, in my mind, is the polarization of the country. And you will see more and more of that over the days to come, I think, both politically, but also in the media as well. The media is divided on this along partisan political lines. Those who accept without question the explanation offered by the White House last night, and those who think that this is a political crisis. So, I mean, so much of this has to play out, and it has to play out in so many different forums, and perhaps the most important, or probably the most important, is the forum of public opinion.
Let's keep in touch on this then over the days to come. Critical times, and Keith, thank you for your valuable insight as always. Keith in Washington this morning.